Today's event is endowed in honor of our special friend, Bill Steinmetz, class of 1950. He was a student, professor, and board member here at MICA. When Bill was a student in the 1940s, he met an intense young sculptor and jewelry maker named Betty Cook. Bill and Betty were married for 61 years. They worked as designers in Baltimore, and they created a unique shop for modern design. Bill was a gifted artist with an angel's heart. In 2009, Betty established the William O. Steinmetz 50 Designer in Residence program. This program brings influential artists and designers to MICA, and our guests have included Teddy Cruz, Eddie Opara, Karen Fong, and Lucille Tenatsis, to name just a few. The Steinmetz residency is further supported by David and Joanne Hayden. Thank you so much for being here. And our amazing residents spend time with their students on campus, which is a huge opportunity for them. Before we start with the main event, I'm going to introduce to you Victoria Pass, Associate Professor of Fashion and Design History here at MICA. And she's going to briefly tell you about the extraordinary design legacy of Betty Cook.
To say just a few words about the inimitable Betty Cook, our most iconic and illustrious design alum. Cook was a pioneer of what we now call mid-century modern, most famously producing stunning jewelry. She and her husband, William Steinmetz, ran the design consultancy Cook & Steinmetz and started Baltimore's legendary The Store Limited to sell Cook's work alongside other modern design. Their work helped to shape the design landscape not only of Baltimore, but also of the United States, and their story begins right here at MICA. Betty Cook was born in 1924 and raised in Baltimore. She was a student at MICA during World War II, which was unusual timing because there were 75 women enrolled and only one man. She graduated in 1946, and the next year, 23-year-old Betty did something quite unusual for the time for a woman. She decided to move out on her own. She bought an 1830s townhouse at 903 Tyson Street, and starting out with her brother's toolkit from shop class, she set to work fixing it up. In 1949, she told the son, "I can work undisturbed and without disturbing anyone else until 3 a.m. if the inclination moves me." Betty turned her new home into a studio and store called simply Shop. At the time, Tyson Street was a vital bohemian community. Eddie Rosenfeld was one of the first artists to move to the neighborhood at the end of World War II, and within 3 years, 19 houses on the block were bought and being renovated. And the local and national press was paying attention, calling it the most charming block in Baltimore. With a location near Antiques Row and a nice bakery, Cook had regular traffic to her store. Her eye-catching house was chartreuse with a red door. She designed a table accommodating traffic patterns in the small space by putting a piece of paper on the floor and using the space where no one had walked as the shape of a tabletop. She would regularly paint the floor different colors. Once it was orange with white stripes. She sold her own designs, leather bags, belts, and small metalwork accessories for the home like bells, fireplace tools, mobiles, and grates. She also sold Japanese folk toys, origami birds, design work by Isamu Noguchi, and contemporary pottery. Cook's jewelry is inspired by natural forms as well as the possibilities of the materials that she uses. She told a reporter in 1949, quote, "Understanding how much the material itself can do is the first necessity, and understanding how much the designer has the right to do to the material without destroying it is a second." Early in her career, Cook used silver, gold, and semi-precious stones for her jewelry, but also unconventional materials like leather, pebbles, wood scraps, steel wool, and even plumber's washers. She used enamel resin to incorporate color into her work, and she explored scale using large quartz crystals, including in designs like these made for Jeffrey Bean runway shows in the late 1970s. She carefully considers how her forms will interact with the contours of the body, making her work incredibly wearable. Her work is also playful and has a real whimsical streak. The Tyson Street community was crucial for Cook as a young designer. She was influenced by the ways her neighbors expressed themselves through design in their own spaces and found important encouragement in following her own instincts. Even her vacations were bohemian. She would spend summers hiking across the US with one set of good city clothes and a case of her samples. She said, "When I reached a big city, I would get out of my hiking clothes and take my samples and visit the outstanding designer shops. In this way, I arranged to get distribution throughout the whole country." Cook's first important exhibition came out of one of these trips. When she arrived at the Walker Art Center in 1948 with her sample case, they were just installing what would become the landmark exhibition, Modern Jewelry Under $50, and her work was then included. It would later travel to our own Baltimore Museum of Art. Betty focused on selling her jewelry not in traditional craft shops, but rather in the new modern design shops that were popping up all across the country, like Design Research in Cambridge. At the same time, Cook was also teaching design at MICA as an influx of men were enrolling on the GI Bill, and one of those men was Bill Steinmetz. He also started teaching at MICA after he graduated in 1950, and the two married in 1955, connecting his home on Reed Street to hers on Tyson and connecting their design practices to form Cook and Steinmetz. They designed the interior and seasonal decorations for Michetone's, a Greek restaurant in East Baltimore, which led to a commission for the Fairview bowling lanes. The project brought their modern aesthetic, alongside furniture by the Eameses, to 50 locations of fair lanes across the United States, transforming bowling alleys from dark and dreary spaces to playful, colorful ones fit for modern families. In 1965, they were invited by Baltimore developer Jim Rouse to open a shop in his new development in Cross Keys. Jim had been a customer at Tyson Street and had regularly worked with Cook and Steinmetz on a number of projects over the years, including wayfinding and signage for the Mondawmin Mall parking lot, one of Rouse's first big projects. They called the shop simply the Store Limited and filled it with Danish and Finnish modern design, including Marimekko textiles, enameled cast iron from France, plastics from Italy, handcrafted goods from places like Thailand and Japan, and the work of American designers like Isamu Noguchi and Frank Gehry. Quite simply, things you couldn't buy anywhere else in Baltimore, probably let alone in the area at the time. As Cook said, "We brought in everything we thought was good design." And as with all their projects, the couple created a highly flexible, modular space that could be reconfigured as needs changed. Betty gradually expanded the fashions in the shop, including cutting-edge designers like Willie Smith and Perry Ellis, whose clothing suited her jewelry. And Steinmetz created many of the cheeky ads for the store, which helped to communicate its modernist aesthetic to the Baltimore audience. Cook and Steinmetz had a clear sense of what they thought of as good design, things that were practical, beautiful, and joyful. The tenets that guided their work together at the Store Limited are also those that have guided Cook's own work as a jeweler, designing for all kinds of customers, creating pieces that have long staying power in wardrobes in Baltimore and well beyond, as evidenced by many people in this room today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Professor Pass, for that amazing story about our amazing Betty Cook. Wow. It is now my supreme delight to introduce this year's William O. Steinmetz Designer in Residence, Paula Scher. Woo! Paula is graphic design's supreme and reigning goddess. She has won countless awards. She has written multiple books. She is even starred in her own movie. How do you get to be a goddess? Paula studied illustration at Tyler School of Art. She discovered this thing that she loved called typography and landed a job at CBS Records in New York City, kind of a dream job. And she found her voice there, creating hundreds of album covers and basically single-handedly created pop culture as we know it. She started her own business, and then in the early 90s, she joined Pentagram as the firm's first woman partner. That was interesting. She has stories. Over the years, Paula kept trusting her gut and doing the work that she knew was fresh and real and strong. She's an inspiration to all of us, a beacon of what we can do. At Pentagram, she made sure that more women became partners, so she's never the only chick in the room. Let's have a big round of applause for Paula Scher. And the graphic design MFA students are kind of going to lead us in a cheer. So if you all could stand up and kind of cheer for kind of, whoa.
Oh my
Come
God.
on forward so people can see you. We have about 20 Paula Schers in the audience. So it's not often that you get to welcome a goddess to your school, and I'm very happy to do so.
She's the goddess. She's the goddess. This is a picture of a man named Joe Papp, and he started a little projection of Shakespeare in various places in New York City by moving it around in a little station wagon and setting up furniture in different areas of New York City. And he petitioned Central Park with the help of the Delacourt family to put on free Shakespeare in Central Park. He began this in the little van that went around in the 50s. By the 60s, there was free Shakespeare, which has been a New York City institution since, I think, 1963. He, at the same time, began to think about a broader space for a theatrical organization that would do more than Shakespeare. And he saved a building that was the Astor Place Library that's downtown on Lafayette Street, sort of a rundown area of Manhattan, and now an area you can't even afford to eat dinner in. And he began his Broadway acclaim by producing Hair, which was not shown at the Public Theater downtown, but was shown on Broadway, and then a series of terrific plays in the 70s, which were all illustrated by the illustrator Paul Davis, who made the portrait I showed you of Joe Papp. At that time, I was working at CBS Records, and I was doing things that looked like this. And I was totally aware of the Public Theater and its impact because I saw the incredible chorus line on the steps of the Public Theater in the 70s with my husband Seymour Quast. And I was then left CBS, as Ellen told you, and I started my own business, and I was doing this work that was considered to be retro for a period of time, and loved making posters in general. They were my favorite work to do. I left my business, which almost went bankrupt in the Bush administration, the first Bush administration, and by a very fortunate accident, I was invited to join Pentagram that same year. Just thought you'd like to take a look. Walk into that every day. They were pretty nice to me individually. In 1994, I got a call from this man. His name is George C. Wolfe. He became director of the Public Theater that year. Joe Papp had died in 1991, and George was offered the job and didn't take it because he knew no one could follow Joe Papp. So he waited 3 years for that person to be fired, which did in fact happen, and then took the position. It tells you a little bit about New York sensibility and business to a degree. George had a very specific vision of what he wanted to accomplish, which is he wanted to take the Public Theater that was now down in that building that was the former Astor Library, and he wanted to open it up to the broadest possible audience, and he wanted to bring in all kinds of people, people of color, gay people, every immigrant that was living in New York City. He wanted a theater for everybody. And he chose playwrights that were groundbreaking and quite revolutionary. And he offered me the opportunity to do the graphics for the Public Theater. And he found me because of this book that was called Graphic Design New York. And it was a book that design firms were allowed to buy pages in. And Pentagram had bought some pages in, but I had bought pages in the book as my old business, which was called Paula Scher. So I had my own section in the book. And in the book were things that looked like this. One was a poster for Elvis Costello that I had done at CBS Records, and another was a poster for a printing company. And the works were graphic and they were typographic. And he thought they would look very different from the Paul Davis paintings, and it would look like it was a new institution. This is what theater advertising looked like and still looks like to this day. It was, it had cute little lines sometimes. It always had illustrations of the cast or something completely expected. And I thought we could really change and reform what theater looked like. And that's what George wanted to have happen. In the process of the discovery of what I thought would be interesting was my favorite book on wood typography, that is the best American typography. And there's a book by Rob Roy Kelly that I still look at to this day if I am stuck for what to do. And in there, I saw this sequence of drawings of the letter R in serif font, in a slab serif font, or sans serif font, where they went thick to thin and maintained their character, which really impressed me. And I thought it would be wonderful to design a simple, powerful typographic view of the theater and let the type talk. The first things we designed were the series of ads. And by the way, this type that you're looking at were done on mechanicals by hand with waxer and an X-Acto knife, and positioned and pasted together because this stuff didn't exist. The type, it was wood type that we Xeroxed and repasted down, and I had stolen the type font set by a set of photostats I took with me out of CBS Records, so I had complete sets of the type. And there was a gentleman who worked for me at that time named Ron Louie who put this whole thing together by hand. And it was amazing because I look at it and I know how long that craft took. And I think about how I spend my time now, and it was much better spent in the craft, I have to tell you. The pieces were extreme. I mean, there was so much stuff that was made that it could blanket New York almost immediately. And I've never really had that effect, I think, since. We hired somebody to work down at the Public who worked with the same fonts and began making Xeroxes and printouts of these things virtually every day. And if you went down to the theater, you were given them. And then, you may not know what this thing is, but it's a payphone kiosk that's outside on the streets. And I remember, I think this is where Ellen first saw the work, because it blanketed either Park Avenue or Fifth Avenue. They were on every other corner going uptown on the street. It's like, having your own gallery on the block. I made sort of broad, simple posters for the first shows of that season, and we made a lot of posters, and they were silk screened, something they stopped doing when they got the bill. But George was really enthusiastic about the work and incredibly supportive. The plays were communicated as collective by the type style and yet individualistic with the photographs. But there was an inherent problem with it, because while we made these terrific posters, most people didn't see them. They were sometimes mounted on the streets, but very often that didn't work. And pretty soon they stopped printing them. And Pentagram bought a big printer, and I made the Public Theater buy one too, and they were printed out individually, so there were never the mass runs of them. Over the years we did them, we found something bad actually happened as a result of these. If the show got terrific reviews, people went to the shows and they saw the posters and they knew the posters, and then they never saw anything else because they didn't get at newspaper advertising or any other kind of visibility. Here's a street sniping in the first year. There were really very few of them. Mostly people found out about the things because they went down to the theater, but that didn't make them go to every show. What people did see were the Shakespeare in the Park posters, which were all typographic and existed every summer in subways and in billboards and kiosks at train stations, and in the New York Times. These are spreads from the Sunday Times. And this went on for a number of years. And then the theater gussied itself up a little bit for the first time, and I met an architect named James Polshek, who I met at the Public with my design work. And he told me to measure everything and hang it up on the wall, which was pretty much how I became an environmental graphic designer, which I've been doing for the past 20 years, thanks to this really wonderful man. We did a later fix of it, which was much more advanced, but during this period was when this big show opened called Bringing the Noise, Bringing the Funk. And that changed the theater back to a hot place because the play was hot. And we made a series of posters for this theater and also a lot of stuff for it when it went to Broadway. And here's where something very extreme and bizarre happened. I've never had this happen before or since. It stopped being an identity for the theater because the look became the identity of New York. Magazines started adapting to it. It began being imitated by all kinds of people in all forms of ads. And what was bad for the Public Theater is that when it went to Broadway, you couldn't see a Public Theater logo on it because it got the name of the theater it was playing at Broadway instead of the Public Theater logo. So while the public made the money, they didn't get the credit for the shows. And this was really sort of a disaster. I must have done 5 campaigns for this that were all over the city between 1996 and 2000. Probably this poster was the most well-known. But then this happened. People just began ripping it off. You know, thick to thin type, wood type. Chicago was the worst because Drew Hodges did this amazing job with the advertising campaign, but it totally ate the Public Theater because they had so much more money. It was a Broadway production. So we had to change it. And I did this series of very depressing posters. As a matter of fact, George Wolfe pointed out I was turning 50 when I designed these, and he says, okay, let's have another year of depressing posters, you're 50. Here they are. Then I abandoned it very quickly and started changing the typography and the font every year just to escape that connection to that wood type, which was still to me the heart of the theater. These are posters I did during that period. And then sometimes I just went off type at all and drew the stuff myself. George left the Public around, I think it was 2005, I can't quite remember the year, and Oscar Eustis, who had been at a theater in Providence, Rhode Island, took it over. And he had a very different vision of the theater than George. He wanted it to be the home for everybody, but he also wanted to create programs that went out into the public, which was different from George. And he made special programs for artists and writers and a whole playwrights group. Very exciting people became members of it, like Philip Seymour Hoffman, and Tony Kushner got a writer in residence there. And he began increasing the programming. And when he became the director, George had this woman who was his financial manager, and she stayed on, and she clashed with Oscar. They didn't get along about anything. Oscar wanted me to design a special identity for a 50th anniversary, and at this point I was sick of wood type anyway, so I moved it to Accidents Grotesques for a year that nobody remembers. And here was the work from that year. And then I just ignored it altogether and did something in upper and lower case. This was very unusual. But I like to show this because this was what the decision-making process was like when Mara, who was the financial director, and Oscar were together. They just butted heads all the time. So what that means is they didn't agree on anything, which meant I redid this stuff hundreds of times. At this point, I thought something was wrong with the relationship, and I really have to change it. Now, during the George Wolfe period, the theater ran out of money at one point in time, and they went into their endowment, which was when the financial person was hired. And at that point in time, I really wasn't working for them. And then the financial period ended. George had power for a period of time, and they wanted me to come back and work. And I realized, because of the thing I'm showing you now, that I did not want to be paid for my work. I'm serious, because they weren't going to pay me for the changes. So I figured if I did one thing, they would buy it, and that would be the end of it, and I wouldn't go through this kind of nonsense. And it was the best thing I ever did in my life, because it totally changed my relationship with the theater. I've been doing that now since I think it's got to be at least 20 years. And I became very close with the theater. I'm totally their consultant. I set up an in-house art department, and we began working in an outside manner. I designed an identity system for them again at Oscar's request, and this lasted about a year and a half, and had the same problem as the other identity system, in that while this looked better small in newspapers, if the show was not a hit, nobody went to see the other stuff. So I had to sit down and rethink the way I was doing this. And at this point in time, we were creating the gussied up new lobby for the public theater. It was done by James Polshek. And we inlaid the typography into the place, went back to the wood type, accepted it as the rightful home of wood type, and that all that stuff from Chicago was over anyway, and we could come back and do what we did initially, but grow it in a different way. And at one point, I was looking at all the posters I had done that were all sort of sniped up behind the desk at the public theater. And I realized what I was doing wrong for the public. And what I was doing wrong was that people did not attend all the plays, and that the plays initially were not what we were selling, because it was a not-for-profit theater, and they put on seasons. And I thought, we have to start selling seasons, not plays. So that my idea was to create a look for a season, and make all the plays conform to it. I got this idea because the first thing we did was kind of an ad campaign for the new public, and we designed something that looked like this, that actually had cell copy on it, which was rare. And this was again out on a phone kiosk, and in the subway, and in subway cars, and people came. So then I thought, what if the graphic for the season is just the graphic for the season, and that it starts to be used in all forms, and it can always be in American wood type. The colors can change, the way we use it can change. And it was this year, when we were doing the Comedy of Errors, that I figured out that I could really make a manual out of it. And what we did was we took the things that were ownable in the promotion to make it for all the individual plays, so that you would have something that would move from one color system potentially to another, and then it would refigure itself as a series of posters. And for some reason, I'm not showing those, but I'll show you these. If you look in this one series of posters, you'll see on the black side a little play named Hamilton that's 5 names down. And this is the way it was actually promoted. But it didn't have to be promoted any more than that, because the way the press covered it, it was such a smash hit. And what happened as a result of that against this kind of promotion was every play got attended. And it changed the whole basis of how the public theater could operate. I began realizing that there had to be a way to brand everything for 1 year, have everyone absorb it, and then have it go away. This year I'm about to show you was the year that all of the plays went up and the membership went up. And then what started to happen was people bought membership more than they bought plays. And for a public organization, that's the most important thing you can do. I would have never done that if I hadn't had actually the control and the power to reshape how they marketed. Generally, designers aren't given that unless they have a close relationship with the organization they're working for. And I'm going to have to face this again because COVID really hurt the theater. And now what's selling are the plays, not the membership. And that's a difference that happened based on the fact that people stopped going to the theater for 4 years. This is what I was working on when we were making Abstract, if you saw the movie. And you saw the sketches on the screen. And what you saw is exactly how I worked. The meeting you saw in the movie is exactly like the meeting goes. And the results are the same. This is not a normal job that I'm showing you in relationship to the body of work. It was something that was first accidental, and then I figured out how to make it my own. And it will change again because Oscar Eustis is going to step down probably in a year or two, and there'll be a new director, and they'll have a new vision too. This was the year when they did this particular play in Central Park that I realized what I had done had really finally taken hold. The plays were so recognizable that when they made this play that was, Julius Caesar with a character dressed up like Trump, the Daily News didn't use a picture of the actor, didn't use anybody from the play. He used the poster from the Public Theater. And that's when I knew that the city understood what this stuff was. And that was amazing. So we've been doing this ever since. And we began animating things for taxis and ultimately now kiosks that exist out on the street. For some reason, my animations aren't working here. Ah, well. Then this happened. I realized that you had to do very little advertising at all because there was this thing called Instagram. And this is just a collection of the first 3 nights of what people did on Instagram. They photographed the playbill, they photographed the little mailer they got or the flyer or whatever it was, and that promoted it for you. And you saw these faces holding that thing up, and it was fantastic. This was another season that worked, and then the season was extended an extra year, and COVID stopped everything. So the following season, I decided that I wanted to make something exceedingly joyful, but this isn't going to move because oh, here we go. They're fun. I love making these things. I do them once a year. I set up an art department inside the Public. They're fantastic. The woman who is my associate at Pentagram now, named Kirsten Uber, was my first art director down at the Public, and I was so happy that she could join me after I lost some of my staff during COVID. And there's an art director who's been there since named Tammy Shell, who is also wonderful. And they create everything for the plays and send me little PDFs on it, and I say, move it to the left or like it or whatever I say, and they run. And what I've been doing every year is trying to reinvent the character of these things. This was last year's, and what we did is take a couple of weights of Knockout, fill it in, put stuff inside it, so it would change character for every play, and it animates on the street. This was the first one that was all the way up and down Fifth Avenue in the poster boxes that are now moving. And this is this year's. This is this season's. Completely animated. It'll be animated on the street. And actually, Abbott Miller took me to his Basquiat show. And it inspired me to work this way because I looked at Basquiat's work and I realized that he actually had a system that seems really sort of erratic, but you could figure it out in terms of the kind of components and the nature of the way he put them together. So to be able to make the people downtown who are working on this be able to use it, we made a real complete standards manual on it. And I'll show you the components. There are several ways to color break this thing. This shows the different widths of the poster, how it sits in poster boxes. And here are the elements, and it tells you how to use them, like any standards manual does. They have other color systems they can work with over the course of the year. We invented a lot of them. And here's the type system. You use one way to type. You put the shadow on it. It's got to be that kind of a scribble. If you go to a fatter one, you have to imitate that one. These are the borders. Here are some scribbles, but you can create your own. And more scribbles and doodles. And they've just begun working with it, and it's a little bit challenging, but I think we're going to get it to work. And that's it. Thank you. Should we do Q&A?
Yeah, we got time.
We got time? Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much. Wow. Wow, so... Hello. Hi, I'm back. Big round of applause for Paula. Standing ovation for Paula. Thank you from the front row. So we have time for a couple of questions. And maybe I'll start by asking you to tell us a little bit about your book.
Yeah, there's a book called 25 Years at the Public Theater that came out before COVID. That really, it's now, I think, 29 years, but who's counting? And the book is everything but, I think, maybe the last two things I showed that were in there. There's a description of the relationships of what went on, why things happened, a little bit more in depth about the history of the people in the theater, and also about my own views about working on something all the way. What I neglected to tell you is that why I did this thing is to really teach myself how to design over and over again.
Can you teach me too?
No, the thing is that as a practitioner, and you probably even feel that as a student, you get burned out by having to learn a new thing and then change for the next thing, and then go on perhaps to a different class with a different type of teacher, or go on, if you're working professionally, to a different client with a different set of expectations. And it's hard to build your own vocabulary that way. Staying with something while you're doing lots of other things, which I was doing during this entire time, is great because it gets you to see how far you can push something and when something doesn't work. And you use that learning in other things you do. For me, this was very important. I've been a designer for 50 years, and I'm not tired of it yet. It's a great profession.
That's so great. Woo! We see that joy in your work. So do we have any questions from the audience? I see one in the middle there, and I'm going to repeat. I think the usher's going to bring you a microphone. That way we're capturing it for our live stream, which I really appreciate. So be thinking about more questions.
Ask questions. I love it. You can ask. You don't have to ask about this. You can ask about anything you want.
I have a question about the record company that you worked at. I have two questions. How did you get that job? Because I want to work at a record company when I graduate. That's one thing. The second thing is, what was your favorite record that you worked on?
Well, I didn't just get that job. I actually worked at 3 places before, and I worked first at a crappy advertising agency for about 2 weeks.
Did you quit or did they fire you?
No, I quit.
Good.
I quit because I couldn't stand what they were making. I mean, I just didn't want to work. I just needed, I was taking a job. I needed a job, but I didn't want that job. So the next job I took, I didn't especially want either, but it was better, which was I was designing and doing mechanicals on the insides of children's books for Random House. And I actually wrote a book called The Brownstone that they published there, which was more accidental. Stan Mack illustrated it. At that point, I wanted to be an illustrator, but they didn't want my illustrations. Then the editor, the person who was my boss at Random House, who was a very nice man and a fairly good designer named Herb Levitt, was leaving to go to an advertising agency, and I didn't want to go to an advertising agency with him, but he thought I should get something good because he didn't know what would happen to me when he left. So he sent me over to a man named Ted Bernstein, who was in the promotion department of CBS Records. And so I worked there before I did record covers. I did ads and posters for records that were all kind of silly. But there was one series of ads that an art director named Bob Deffrin liked, and he was the art director of Atlantic Records. So I went to Atlantic Records first and worked there for a year, and I did about 25 covers there. And I got hired back as East Coast art director of CBS. So it was like the work would bring work, that if you were successful at something you did, you were likely to be helped or moved ahead when you got started. But when I went to CBS, I wasn't right out of school. I was young. I think I was 25 years old when I was East Coast art director. And I did that for 8 years until I started my own business. And my favorite covers were a series of large photographs blown out of scale, which were covers for a guy named Bob James that you probably haven't heard of, or maybe you have. But what was interesting in asking the question was, tomorrow, the son of the producer of Bob James albums, who's in Wilco, is coming to see me because he wanted to interview me about these Bob James covers from 45, 50 years ago. And I love that never goes away, that you actually have a connection to everything you do if people like it and they remember it, and that's an astounding thing.
We have another question. Great, thank you.
Hi. In your abstract episode, you had this infographic about a client meeting. I cannot stop thinking about it because actually I was a freelancer at the time, and the whole, the way that you take feedback and then keep control was really important to me. Could you speak more about that control?
For those who don't know what she's talking about, I made a diagram of a meeting. And the way it works, it's like, one of these kinds of diagrams. In the beginning, you come in with an idea, you've got a presentation, and when you walk in the door, there's the bottom line is the level of expectation, and your goal is to make the level of expectation higher so that you develop this enthusiasm towards what you're doing. So you begin to present, and you have the enthusiasm grow, and it grows, and it grows, and then it reaches this peak. And at that moment, somebody will make a remark, and the remark will usually be something that turns it a little bit negative, and it'll start to go down, and it'll start to go down.
What kind of remark?
Oh, well, I don't really like that color, or didn't
a good one.
Or didn't so and so do that, or didn't they have, it's that sort of a thing, we know what those are, and it goes down, and it goes down, and it goes down, and it goes down, almost to the level of where you walked in the door. So you're right back. You've straightened it out, you've flattened it out, and you can get it back up probably about halfway, maybe a little bit more. At that point, the meeting must end. You must finish the meeting, you must close the door, you must have to take a phone call, you have to catch a plane, get out of the room, because the only thing that will happen is it will go down to the diminishing returns where it's gone, and people will remember where it was at the moment that you left the room, so that's fine.
Good advice, I think, for all of us.
It is diagrammable.
Thank you. So I think we can take another question. I see a question over in the corner, or if somebody already owns the mic, that's good. I think we'll do 2 more questions, including this one. Thanks.
Hi, so I am currently working on a freelance work for like theater production identity, and I was just wondering what is your, how do you find the voice of theater production like in your work and stuff? So,
Well, there are two very different types of projects with theater if you're doing identities for a play. And one is if the theater is a theater that shows all kinds of things that are different and the play is driving the graphic, or if it's the theater driving the graphic. And you have to, very often, there was Fells Point here where Paula Scher did a lot of posters and you could tell it was his work, but it was very much the personality of that theater. That's one way it happens. And the other way, which is more erratic, is if you're doing the individual play and there's a lot of money behind it, because that's actually harder to achieve. The person who did that well was actually Drew Hodges, who worked for me, who founded a company called Spotco. And they did very commercial things quite well, but not all of them well, because of the nature of the client. So you're going to have to determine what's at stake, what do they care about, and listen really carefully and try to respond to their sensibilities, and then do what your goal in life is, which is to elevate their expectation of what the thing can be. Does that help? I hope.
That's great.
That's a thumbs
Thanks.
up. Good.
Okay, we have one more question.
The guy in the back? Well, we can take 3. We'll go
All
fast.
right, 2 more questions. I listen to what she tells me to do. You know?
Hi, how you doing? I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about the transition from a more analog process to a more digital process in platforms like Adobe, and how that may have impacted your work.
It changed the way I spent my time. I think that when I think back on the record industry days, you know, the height of technology was something called a Lucy machine, where you could blow up a piece of tracing paper. And that craft took all the time. You would have meetings. My clients in the music business days were the recording artists, because they all had contractual cover approval. There wasn't anything called the marketing department. It was called merchandising, because it came from the art department directly to the store, and there wasn't this other stuff in between. There were sort of periods where some of the design choices were made by things I had to do because I didn't have the appropriate technology. For example, I just remembered this recently because there's a book called 33 1/3 that comes out, and they write about one album. And somebody wrote about Cheap Trick, which I did the cover for. And the inside the album is liner notes, and all the liner notes are in my handwriting. And then they bought the other subsequent albums, and they found out they were all in my handwriting, and they asked me why I did it. And they thought that there was some great esoteric reason why I wrote everything by hand, but I had to think back on why I did it, and I realized that the reason I did it was when the first cover was going to out to the printer, the liner notes weren't complete. They were lyrics, and I didn't have them, and we couldn't set them overnight because it wouldn't come back fast enough, and then they'd have to do the mechanical on it. So it would be a day and a half, and it had to go out the following morning. So I sat at CBS Records and wrote out all the liner notes, and that's why they're in my handwriting. It wasn't there was no mysticism in it, you know, it's just like that was the technology. That would have never happened now, but the idea, after I had done it, it became a thing. So then I had to do them all. And but that was fine. There still wasn't the technology. So the time thing is really, really crucial. Quality-wise, I think that you think that because you can't do something because you don't have the right equipment, that it's going to destroy your creativity. It really doesn't. You adjust yourself to what's ever at hand. If they took away the computer tomorrow, you could probably still make stuff. It isn't what you expect it to be. It's just what you're used to. But if you think about how you actually really approach something, you're doing partially the solve for the equipment you have at hand. It's just as easy to make it a drawing sometimes, if you think about it. If you understand scale and you want to rip a piece of paper, you can do that. It doesn't go away if you don't have the equipment. Now, can the equipment make it better? You bet. Can you do things like animate and make things flip around? Can you pull 20 million objects off of AI and retouch them and make something cool with it? Yeah, you can do that too. But you also can go in a drawer and find a bunch of stuff that's lying around to do it with that as well. It's true. Trust me.
We have one more question.
Two more.
All right. Thank you so much for that. Amazing. And I'm not a graphic designer. I have to ask about your favorite artists. I saw Basquiat, of course, you mentioned. I saw a little bit of Barbara Kruger. I don't know, maybe some Keith Haring. Some favorite constructivism. We talk a little bit about that. Who are your favorite artists?
Oh, pretty much everybody you mentioned. No, I have a lot of favorite artists, and they impact me at different times in different periods, and then I see something that I hadn't thought about before, and then they become my favorite artist, and it's been like that forever. I love very bold and very gorgeous typography, and I love the old stuff, and I love the new stuff. I think this is the best period ever for type. The people are just doing incredible things with it. I'm always inspired by it. I see it here. I see it in all places where kids have really adapted to the software that can manipulate and draw and produce fonts. It's fantastic. There's everything. Everything works. And sometimes I'm inspired by just walking down the street in New York City.
She kind of likes graphic design, Monica. Okay. This was incredible. Thank you. We're going to have a book signing upstairs in the beautiful Leidy atrium. There are some snacks. The snacks may not hold, but get what you can. Paula will be signing her amazing book, which is not just a book about the public theater, but is also stuffed with posters that are really fantastic. So thank you all. Thank you, Betty Cook. Thank you, Vicki and Paula and all our supporters. Go.